I've titled my talk today Six in the City, and it's about how you build good businesses here in New Zealand, and I guess how we success them and how we grow them so we've got good jobs for our kids to do and for businesses to do in the future. I want to start because I've actually I want to relate this to a personal story. This was the start of Electropar in 1950. It was a business that was started by my grandfather. And there are enough people in this room who are old enough to understand the days of import licensing. So he came back from the war and managed to grab a couple of import licenses, having been a radio operator on the Achilles, and started importing diodes and resistors and variacs and all sorts of funny stuff. And I opened in this little building in 1950 and with the Thames Trader. Loved the old Thames Trader. So it was a 65-year story until we sold the business in 2010. And Murray Wallace, my grandfather, he started it in 1950. And then my dad and his brother, they joined in the early 1970s. Dad is exactly 20 years older than I am, so he's 65, I'm 45, and I came along as sort of a bit of an accident. And in those days, you actually, when you had an accident like that, you had to get married. These days, I'm not so sure it applies. My uncle is Uncle Tony, that's Dad's brother. He's a couple of years younger. And then I joined the business when I was 8. I'm very proud of this, because when you've got a mum that works, guess what you do in the school holidays? You go to work with your dad and you're given a broom. And pretty soon, having been given a broom and working in the factory, and it was a small factory in those days, you learned how to set the machines in the factory and how to work with the people in the factory environment. And by the time I was 12, I was machine setting the machines in the holidays and after school and whenever else required for a whole lot of the South Auckland workforce to be able to make the stuff we were cranking out of the factory. I actually officially joined in 1995, and it's quite a good story because I'd sort of at a bit of a loose end, having come out of university and trying to figure out what to do, and Dad said, "Oh, come in and see me in the business." And so I said, "Oh, okay, do I have to?" And I'd sworn never to join the family business. And he came in and I sat in his office, and I remember he had this bit of paper in front of him. He pushed it across the table at me and he says, he says, "Tell me a bit about your background." And I said, "Oh, God." So I turned the bit of paper over and there was an employment contract and we signed it and never looked back. We opened a PTY Limited business in 2000. In 95 when I joined, it was a pretty small company. We were turning over about 7 million Kiwi. When we started the PTY business in Melbourne, it was at 0 in 2000, and by 2005 we had it to about 10 million, and that was intensively by going over there every second week for 2 years and building it. We sold it and we turned over about $40 million in 2010 to a NASDAQ-listed US business called Preform Line Products. Really, really high-quality company, headquartered in Cleveland, high-quality people, good operators, and the best people that we thought in the world who could take the company forward and take the IP that Electropar had developed and genuinely internationalise it. And then I guess I joined the Icehouse in late 2014 because having become the Global Business Development Director, that was a job that you couldn't sit and drive a desk, so you're sort of travelling around the world for 6 or 7 months a year. And Mum eventually said, "Oh, I think I've had enough of this." And I said, "Oh, I think I'm a one-trick pony." And she said, "Well, tell you what, I'll find you another job." And I said, "Oh, that's fine. Good luck with that." And 3 days later, she found the job with the Icehouse on Facebook, sent it to me and said, "Apply." And so here we are. So the Icehouse, what is the Icehouse? Well, I guess the Icehouse has 3 key goals. And I guess we want to create these things called BIQs, businesses of international quality. Electropar was a business of international quality. We think that New Zealand needs 3,000 BIQs to be able to grow and grow its GDP, grow employment, grow and be successful into the future. And we say 3,000 BIQs by 2020. And 1,000 of those BIQs looks like 25,000 new jobs, $20 billion in revenue growth, and a whole lot of growth coming from the export sector. I guess what is a business of international quality? Well, if you're an exporter, it means you can export from New Zealand and compete in your destination markets. If you are an importer, it means that you can compete against the entrant of an offshore competitor. So if you guys think about it, a good example is IKEA. If IKEA comes and starts up next to a New Zealand manufacturer of furniture, if that New Zealand manufacturer of furniture dies because effectively it's got no customers because IKEA has stolen them all, having opened up next door, then it's not a business of international quality. If that furniture manufacturer survives, it is and it will. So the Icehouse offering spans what we call the startup side and the growth side. In the startup side here, these are generally businesses with little or no funding, little or no expertise, and often little or no money. And we pump them through effectively a sausage factory of acceleration or incubation to get them to what we call a liquidity event. And a liquidity event is basically a funding event, whether it's a funding round where funds are raised from high net worths, or it's a funding round based on an IPO, or a funding round based on a combination of both, or the angel investment network. And this accounts for about 25% of what we do. In here on the growth side, that's about 75% of what we do. And most of my job is actually working with established Kiwi businesses between sort of $3 and $200 million turnover to make them better businesses. And how we do that is we effectively, it's either professional development for the people or it's leadership. A lot of the time for me, it's leadership, because if leaders have got ambition, they want to grow and they know how to grow, and we can inspire that leadership from within organisations, they will grow, and as a result, the country will do better. The Icehouse has been pretty successful at this. So these are the impact stats. We measure these impact stats every year. And I guess this 5.9% improvement in employment per alumni is one of the key things we go by. This one here, grow turnover by 14.3%. How many guys around or people in this room could say they grow turnover or had a compound annual growth rate of better than 10%? That's a pretty tough call. So we measure what a BIQ looks like via this thing called the BIQ barometer. And the BIQ barometer is around these 6 pillars of business: leadership, offering, market, processes, capital, and governance. And there is an online tool we use for assessing a business at any point in its history or at a moment in time to figure out whether it is a BIQ at that time or not. Now, the thing about a BIQ is once you're a BIQ, you're not always a BIQ. A barometer by nature goes up and down. Sometimes, do you think Fonterra's a BIQ at the moment? No. Right. So sometimes you are, sometimes you are not. So for us, that's a bit of a problem, because if we're trying to make 1,000 BIQs, actually, you know what? You get 10 more this year and then you lose 5. Or you get 20 more in the last quarter and you lose 3. It definitely goes up and down. So it's actually more than 700 businesses have completed this thing called the BIQ barometer now. And I want to share with you the scores from the BIQ barometer. And I actually provide some insight around the New Zealand SME sector. Because I'm sure many of you have owned a business or been in business or work with privately owned businesses day by day. And the results of this are really interesting. So from the 500 businesses in this sample, and it's only CEOs, right, that have completed the barometer, the average number of full-time employees is 33, and the average turnover is $4.8 million. And this is what it looks like, and I know this is a very difficult slide to read, so I'm just going to skim over it quite quickly. But up the top, people think that they've got balance sheet strength, leadership style, competitive advantage, and financial management capability. Generally, New Zealand SMEs think they've got a pretty good grip on those things. So they're in the top quartile. Down at the bottom, you've got international finance, vision and strategic direction, segmentation and focus, people, processes, governance, and IP protection. It's interesting that governance is right at the bottom. Grant said to me that the business he's running at the moment, they've put in place an advisory board, right? Most Kiwi SMEs that I talk to do not have an advisory board of any measure and don't really understand the value of having an advisory board. So I thought what I would do is then sort of unpack some of the characteristics of a business of international quality and then give you a picture of what Electropar looked like versus the BIQ, the way that we define it. So I guess in terms of leadership style, we thought we were pretty ambitious. It was stable. Obviously, my dad and his brother have been there for nigh on 40 years and me for 15. We were very growth oriented and we had very clear goals. To be a BIQ, you've got to have all of those things. In terms of governance, we had a board in name only. We had one of those boards where we would sit and write the board minutes once a year and put them in the file to satisfy the company's office. But we did have our leadership team chaired by an external advisor. And you know why? Because my uncle would turn up to the leadership team reports without the financials fully completed, and it used to drive me nuts. So the way to get him to come to the management meeting once a month with the financials completed was to make sure it was chaired by an external advisor, and then he couldn't escape. I think that was a start towards an advisory board, but now I have seen an advisory board in action. It actually fundamentally is part of being a business of international quality. So this is where I guess when people answer the survey, you get a bit of a disconnect. Up here, leadership style, 74% of people think that they're green in that area. But down here, vision and strategic direction gets a 49%. It's a bit of a funny figure, isn't it, really? I mean, so these people really rate their leadership, but frankly, the vision and strategic direction of the company is pretty crappy. So I guess the truth lies somewhere in between. In here in the middle, a strength of management team and company culture. So I guess just because you're a good leader doesn't mean you've got a clear vision, good strategic direction, good company culture, or a good management team. In terms of offering, I guess when we came to sell the business, we had developed our own IP and we patented and copyrighted it, and that added to the multiplier of selling the business enormously. We'd also invested in a test laboratory. It's funny, just talking to Kerry before I started my presentation, I truly think New Zealand businesses have to own the creativity end of the process. They have to own the IP around that, that is evolved from that creativity process. If they're a manufacturer, they often have to develop the tooling because the tooling has to be pretty smart to be able to make it. But then effectively, you have to be bold enough to send the manufacture offshore, not necessarily to to one single offshore manufacturer, but to be able to compete. If you want to export from New Zealand, you need a balance of local manufacture and flexibility in short run, and if it's long run stuff, to be able to use the $10 US per day labour and overhead rate that you'll get in Indonesia or in Thailand. So when it comes to the offering component of the BIQ barometer, up here 74% of New Zealand businesses think they have a competitive advantage, but only 53% really understand their core competency. Again, I think that's another real disconnect. How can you have a competitive advantage if you don't really understand your core competency? In terms of the Electropar example, we had our customers segmented quite kind of nicely. We had it organised around, we had budgets around products and customers. And I guess we had some pretty highly developed metrics so that we had some magic numbers so that we knew how the business was running. I mean, all of these things, I guess, are the things that characterise a business of international quality to a greater or a lesser extent, depending on the nature of your particular business. When you look at the market aggregate results, 60% of businesses think they understand their market. 49% down for customer segmentation and focus. I guess what that fundamentally means is that people have not done what I would call a detailed customer segmentation. Why are these customers over here buying lots and you're successful, and these ones over here not so much? In terms of processes, people, operational, financial, we had a very old computer system. That was a weakness. We should have updated the computer system, but we'd spend all the money on IP protection, copyright, and developing the Australian business. I guess one of the secrets, I think, is that we controlled a lot of the pricing and the costing by the owners. None of the other people in the business controlled the costing or the pricing. It was all done from my desk or one of the other two guys' desks. The other thing that was a bit unusual was we had an open email system. So an open email system meant that everybody could read everybody's email from within the business, right? And it all was native within the CRM. That was extremely powerful because while I was talking to customers, I could look at what the purchasing department was saying to a supplier in the States or in China or wherever we were buying stuff from. So financial processes are at 60% up here. People processes down here at 47%. What's fascinating about the people processes down at 47%, that's a pretty low score, but what's your biggest bill every fortnight? As a business, your biggest bill by miles is wages and salaries every fortnight. It is in New Zealand anyway. So what this says to us, I guess, at the Icehouse is that people aren't really investing in their number one asset or the number one thing that they're paying for. Getting to the end, capital, balance sheet strength, financial management, international finance. I think to run a really good business of international quality, you've got to have at the Icehouse we call magic numbers. And magic numbers for a business might be revenue, it might be turnover, it might be gross margin, it might be what percentage of products that you've sold in the last year are new products, right? And that's a measure of innovation. Might be delivery in full and on time metric, which is a customer satisfaction metric. Without those, and without being able to communicate those to your team quickly and effectively every day, then I think it's going to be a struggle to run a business of international quality. The other thing I think is, as a business owner, we provided management accounts to the management team. Not a full P&L or a full balance sheet, but certainly a set of management accounts so they could see how the business was tracking. So up here, 75% for balance sheet strength, 70% for financial management capability, But down here, this one's key, right? 50% of businesses rate their ability as far as international finance capability is concerned. That's pretty low. If we want to be an exporter, if we want to grow our business with the world, then we're going to have to do better in terms of international finance. So I guess the business was sold. And here is the key reason why. Shortly after I joined the Icehouse in February, I did a BIQ barometer, imagining it was the last day that the three of us owned the shares, which was the 31st of July 2010. And this one over here is my result. So you can see that these results are pretty common, right? Then I got Dad to do it here, about 6 weeks later, and then I got my uncle to do it over here. Now what's amazing, and this is not a jack-up, right? It couldn't possibly be a jack-up with these sort of results. It's way too difficult. Look at the commonality of the results. Orange, green, green. The same pattern all the way around. Where it was wrong, or where it was disconnected, was in the leadership. And that's why the business was sold, because we actually couldn't agree on the succession for the business. So typically a business grows in a couple of different ways. Either the startup pathway towards a liquidity event, or via an owner-managed pathway towards what we call a succession event. That succession could be external investment, it could be generational succession, or it could be outright sale. And I guess this is what's represented by these blue squares at the bottom here. And I guess whether it's an established business or a startup business, the Icehouse's job is to grow New Zealand businesses to get to those events, then grab them again and push them to the next level. So where we play with entrepreneurs and owner-managers who are seeking high growth, and how we win in New Zealand by growing capability and aspiration through greater skills, clarity and support. If you know a business, you think they're a rock star, they just need a bit of a push in the right direction, then we're the right people for you guys.